Welcome to Author Chat, BookTrib.com. We are talking today with Walt Gragg, who is the author of the book The Red Line. And this is Walter's first book. It is a thriller based on what would be World War III. And Walt is a former attorney who's now retired and served in himself in Vietnam. So welcome to BookTrib and Author Chat, Walt.
Well, thanks for having me on, Issue.
So I want to get started by, first of all, showing the book. Do you have a copy of the book with the cover?
I certainly do. I have lots of copies of the book, but I've got one I can hold up here.
Yes,
so
show us the cover
we'll
of
put
the
that
book.
up. We got it?
A little higher?
A little higher. All right.
Great, thanks. So that's The Red Line. This is your first book. So tell us a little bit about it without giving away the whole plot, because it is a thriller and you want people to have that suspense still happening. So tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, I've heard they're going to have plenty of suspense with this one, according to my readers. It is a world. It's supposedly a World War III epic.
Okay.
It's a book about a war between the United States and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
It takes place in Germany in the middle of a huge blizzard.
Okay.
The subject matter is not necessarily unique. Other authors have addressed it. Tom Clancy wrote Red Storm Rising.
Mm-hmm.
Hackett wrote Third World War. Harold Coyle has done some work in this area, Larry Bond, and so on. But The Red Line really is unique. If the reader thinks they're just going to get a rehash of what those authors did,
Mm-hmm.
They're quite wrong. And the reason it's unique, well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, the book is based on my own personal experiences of what this war would look like. I served at United States European Command Headquarters in Germany in the middle of the First Cold War. I was there for 38 months, if I recall. Mm-hmm. And so while I was there, I was able to see some of the American plan and certainly participated in a number of war games where we actually went through various scenarios of what we anticipated a Russian attack would look like. It was before the days of video games, but it was kind of a manual video game. We would get problems, and then we'd have to respond, and then so it would go on. But the thing about that, my point about that is, The Red Line is actually a book that probably replicates what this war would truly look like in a very, very stark, realistic manner. And one of the nice things about it, I'm told, is that people love the characters and they love the action. They really love the action, but they love the characters equally well. And what we tried to do was write a book that wasn't so much about presidents and generals and dictators and people like that, but much more about ordinary people. So what we do to tell the entire war is the reader will actually be moving back and forth between 5 different storylines of 5 different American soldiers. Mm-hmm. As the war progresses. And so that's the uniqueness of this book. A lot of people have tried to compare it to Clancy or to one of the others, but my writing style is nothing like any of theirs. It's unique to me. And so we're having really good responses. I've had multiple people say it's the best book they've ever read. Right. I've had tons and tons say it's the best book they've read in years. I've had a couple say they didn't like it, but that's the rare exception with this book. People tell me they love it. It's awesome. So far so good as far as the book goes, but it is a unique read. People shouldn't go into it with a prejudgment that they're just reading another version of Red Storm Rising.
Okay. So this book, one of the things that I've learned about it and that I've seen other people talk about, people who reviewed the book, all seem to agree that this book really intricately shows the atrocities of war and what that looks like through the eyes of the characters. And in a time when people are really kind of desensitized to it. So how did you how are you able to communicate that with your characters and in the plot?
Well, I think it's pretty easy if you look at the realities of it. War's not a video game. It's not some kind of a form of home entertainment that we see on the news channels. It is a starkly realistic event in its own. So I think it was, I just had the characters live through what I knew from my own, from working over there, what I knew this war would look like, and what I knew or strongly suspect the Russian attack would look like. And so it was there's nothing magical about it. It was just a lot of hard work to try to present this in a way that is starkly realistic. And certainly a lot of reviewers and a lot of people have said, oh my God, I had to put the book down for a minute because I found myself standing in the snow with the soldiers with the Russian tanks coming at them. So it's while we're going into fall, but in summer it's a really good read because you can actually bring nice cold snow into your life for a few minutes. There's nothing really magical about it. It's just a matter of I think knowing your characters and knowing your subject matter, and then just working very hard to make it. This isn't about superheroes. This isn't a book about some superhero. It's a realistic look at the realities of such events.
Okay. Given our current political climate, do you see similarities between your book and where we are as a nation, particularly with our relations with Russia?
Yeah, unfortunately. I'm certainly not an expert in Russian government and history, but I did take some college classes in that area, and certainly I faced them across the border for over 3 years. So if you look at them historically, it's kind of easy to understand where they're coming from. They lost somewhere between 20 and 27 million. No one's exactly sure during World War II. They had about half soldiers and about half civilians killed by the Nazi invaders. So naturally, they're quite nervous about the power of the West. And I think you see that. I think the reason the first Cold War actually was successful is they had a buffer between us and them with Poland and Czechoslovakia and Hungary and all the other countries of the Warsaw Pact, kind of buffering them from Germany and from the West. Well, that buffer's gone. So I think it's quite natural. Putin wants to return his country to its rightful place in the world. Taking the Crimea was just step one. The attempts in the Ukraine last year that are still somewhat ongoing are obvious steps. And you see more and more in the newspapers and discussions about the term the Second Cold War is coming up quite a bit. So I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah. So tell us how you went from being an attorney to being an author. That's a lot of attorneys do write, but you wrote fiction, not nonfiction. So how did you make that decision to kind of shift?
Well, I'm not so sure writing briefs and appeals and things like that isn't fiction sometimes. So I don't know if it was that big a stretch. I had come up with the idea when I was over in Germany and just wasn't able to write it. We didn't have the time or the ability. And finally, after a while, after I saw kind of that the lessons we learned in Vietnam, that the American public learned in Vietnam had disappeared, and that we were getting very casual about war, I just decided I had to write this. So for me, it was, I don't have a master's in fine art like many of my fellow writers. I never planned to be a writer, but I had a story to tell. So it was a matter of just sitting down and telling it and reworking it and reworking it and reworking it until the words finally just literally jumped off the page. So there was nothing magical about it. I think being an attorney helped because it helps. That kind of writing and that kind of thinking helps you structure. So when you take this wildly creative process and my wildly creative mind, and then you put a little attorney structure to it, it kind of worked. So they said, I don't know what the right answer is there, but said, I don't see the two jobs to be all that different as far as fiction goes.
So is there going to be a follow-up to this book? Because you have mentioned to me before that they are going to try and work this into some kind of miniseries. So will there be a follow-up or another book, or maybe something just totally different?
Um, we do have a couple of producers in Hollywood who are putting together. Last time I heard about it, they were talking about an 11 episode. I don't think they call them miniseries anymore, but that's what I always thought. Always heard them called. I think they're called now major television events or something. But they are working on that, so we're hoping that it'll be, in a few years here, the Red Line will be a television event. There will not be a follow-up to it, and I don't want to give away too much, but readers will understand when they read the final word why, final word of that book why. We do have a second novel in New York right now that's being considered, and so we'll probably go with it. It's also a military thriller, but this one takes place in Egypt,
Okay.
and I'm working on a third one that takes place in Pakistan. So I'll probably stay in the military thriller area. And like I said, hopefully there'll be a book 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know. I'm not a young man. I'm not going to write 20, but and these aren't easy writes, but we'll try to get a few out there.
So for our viewers who are writers, because we do have a lot of people who watch and kind of want writing tips from the authors that we feature. I know writing a book includes various rewrites, and you have to reconfigure characters and plot lines, and sometimes things work and sometimes they don't. Explain your writing process and how you were able to not just create the characters, but really just kind of lay out a suspense thriller novel, because those are difficult to write.
Yeah, this wasn't an easy book with 5 stories at once, and rather, of course, military thrillers are always typically pretty long books, so it wasn't easy. I'm not sure anybody uses. I'm not even sure what my process is myself sometimes. Honestly, when I started this book, I had 2 characters of the main characters identified. The other 3 just showed up as I went along. I knew the beginning of the book. I knew the ending of the book. Everything in the middle, I didn't have a clue. It just literally, as we worked through, it would appear. I'm not a big outliner. And my fellow writers, I've met lots and lots of famous writers and others, kind of middle of the road writers, and they all have a different process. Some are literally outline their book almost to the point where it's written. Others don't do much outlining at all. I kind of fall into that group. What we typically do is my wife and I will sit down after we've finished a set of chapters, maybe 3 to 5. And then we'll kind of talk about what the next 3 to 5 are going to be, which characters they are, which part of the storyline, what events we've just left, where we're going. And we might write 3 or 4 little notes for each chapter. And then my editor is actually Tom Clancy's editor at Penguin Random House. So he's a very, very famous editor and probably the biggest editor in the country when it comes to thrillers. And so he's very respected, but when I told him a couple of months ago how I actually write, I think he looked at me like I had about 6 heads, because I don't even write the chapters in a linear manner. I might write chapter 17 before chapter 13. And even if I'm writing chapter 13, I may write the middle of it first, or sentences toward the end, or the ending at the beginning. I treat it like a huge jigsaw puzzle, and I just put pieces in until it flows and it works. I don't even know how to describe it exactly.
You said that you just mentioned that you sit and process your work with your wife. Is she going to end up doing some writing herself?
She was a teacher, an elementary school teacher for 45 years, and so she's written a middle grade novel, but I don't know if it'll ever get published. Her heart's really not into this. Even I'm not a true writer. I'm just kind of a storyteller, but I have lots of writer friends that it's write or die. They have to write as much as they have to breathe, and they have to sit down and write. But I don't feel that way. It's more, I've got some things to say. I say them. When I run out of things to say, I think I'll stop writing. But so I don't know if she'll ever have her little book published or what we'll do. But who knows in this world? I can't foretell what's going to happen 10 minutes from now, let alone in the next few years.
So I have one final question for you. When readers finish your book, what do you want them to take away from it?
Well, first, I want them to be entertained. I don't think any writer has a right to ask you to read their book if they're not going to make it something that's enjoyable for the reader. So that's step one. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to enjoy the process and every word. But it is a story with a message. It's not a simple summer read. There are a lot of those, and they're fine. I've certainly read lots of summer reads myself. I like to call them fast food writing. You read the book, you enjoy it while you're reading it, but 2 hours later you're hungry for something else. So I hope this is more stick to your ribs writing. There's going to be a lot to think about as you read this book and after you finish it for the reader. I think they're going to, and they should keep in mind that this is based on what I found would likely happen in this war. I tried to make it just as accurate as I could. That they're going to find some things that are going to surprise them and shock them and get them hopefully thinking.
Right.
Thinking about war in general, thinking about where we are right now in history, and to get them maybe pausing and discussing with their friends. And lastly, I hope I know I've had some reviewers say, I can't wait for a second book. So hopefully some of them will feel they'll take that away too. So each reader's different. They should take away from it what they want. If they just want it to be a summer read, I guess you could try to do that. But if you want something much more, if you want it to stick to your ribs, this just might be the book they want to look at.
Great. Thank you so much for sitting and chatting with us about your book, The Red Line. It is available now. And if people want to order it, they can just go straight to Amazon.com.
Yeah, it's available in print and in ebook and in audiobook. So they can go all the normal places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Blackstone Audio did the audio. I think they can go on there and find it if they'd rather they'd rather listen to the book than read it themselves. And I know there are people that prefer that. So it's available in all the traditional locations and in all three methods.
Okay. And if people want to contact you and find you, do you have your website is waltgragg.com, WaltGragg.com. Right?
Yes. Okay. And there is a way they can email me on there. We have Facebook pages. We have a Red Line Facebook page. We have a Walt Gragg Facebook page. We have even have my private, or not private, but my more general one, Walter Gragg. So they can go onto Facebook if they want to be friends or if they just want to comment on something. Excuse me. Comment on something or ask a question or whatever. I know I had a fellow this morning on Facebook going, "Oh my God, is that the cost of the other book? That's outrageous." I said, no, that's the library version where it has multiple copies. Go back to Audible or Blackstone and get the real price. So they can contact me with questions like that. And just every week I have multiple people go on there and say, wow, it was a great experience. I loved it. I had a Marine on there about a week ago who said it was the best book he'd ever read. So almost every morning when I get up, there'll be some good comments. Like I said, once in a while there's not so good ones, but that's the reality of being a writer. I don't think I can't think of a book in the world that everybody loves, but we're doing really well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for talking with us, and go get The Red Line.
Well, thanks for having me on.
All right. Bye-bye.